Hi, I'm Gatlin Voelker, and welcome to Beyond the Bar with Jack and Brandon.
We certainly had a lot of snow last couple of days, didn't we?
Yeah, it led to our office being basically shut down for 2 days.
Yeah, maybe a day and a half would have been more reasonable. So, you know, a lot of people have been talking. Obviously, most of us have been home for the last couple of days or working from home or paying a little more attention to social media than normal. And I've seen a lot of chatter about should I shovel or not shovel and the liability on such. Got any thoughts on that?
I don't think from a legal standpoint it matters at your home. I think it's personal preference.
Did you shovel?
I actually went out and initially shoveled just a walkway so that my kids' small dogs could find a place to relieve themselves. Then I moved on to the driveway, but I was fortunate that my neighbor down the street had a large tractor pulled a good chunk of the snow out of my driveway for me.
So the analysis you were going through was less, do I have liability for shoveling the snow? It was more practical. I don't necessarily want urine and feces in my house.
I actually even had to do a patch of the yard for Rowan's puppy to go out to. Actually, it is a credit to my son. He did go assist and clear that area.
Did you compensate him for that?
He's compensated enough just on his general
Really?
day in and day out living.
We have a capitalist form of system in our household where I feel like the children don't do anything without dollars being floated in front of them.
Well, they may ask, and then I remind them they have a phone, they have this, they have that.
Another topic for another day.
True.
So, myth or legend that if I attempt to remove snow from my sidewalk, but I don't do a very good job on it, and my neighbor slips and falls and breaks their hip, do I have exposure on that?
No,
None at all?
I don't think so. I mean, because like you said, we're getting all kinds of calls. I even had a call come up about somebody on a sidewalk that's state-owned, because it involves a bus stop, and that first of all, it's a state, they're immune from suit. But as to your private home, I think that you'd have to show, the case law is you have to show some affirmative act of negligence by the homeowner. I think that,
There has to be a duty, right?
yeah, I think the bigger risk would be somebody, not necessarily the snow, but let's say somebody who goes out on a December day, the temperatures are 15 degrees out, and decides to empty their bucket of mop water on the sidewalk, creating a icy,
Right.
spot. I think that's an affirmative act. You have to show some intentional, not intentional, some negligent, some type of form of
So
negative.
your position
negative.
would be mitigation of snow and ice, while it might not be perfect, and the reality is the 10 to 12 inches of snow we received with the ice in between, nobody did a perfect job of shoveling. It was virtually impossible with this snowstorm. That improper shoveling would not be an affirmative act.
No, I don't believe so.
So
That doesn't mean that somebody's not going to get creative.
right, so let's talk through
sue.
that. Yeah, the practical side is here in Kentucky. Talk about comparative fault a little bit, because I think that's a concept people need to understand, which is a little different than Ohio. That in Kentucky you can be 1% at fault and theoretically be sued.
Yeah, I always say it's like, imagine it's a pie. There's 100 pieces, and how many get stuck on you for doing something bad versus me for not knowing you had done something bad. Is it 75-25, 99-1?
I'm walking down the street, it's snowing, it's icy. I obviously have to assume some level of risk in that situation. It's obviously a open and obvious condition.
Which
is,
used to be law, and now that went away. It's straight up comparative
sure,
analysis.
but the jury's still looking at it that way, right? At the end of the day, a judge or jury is going to look at the facts and circumstances. They're going to say, okay, this person's walking down the street. They should realize it's slippery. They should realize that this might not be great. I agree with you. I think in this scenario of somebody improperly shoveling in front of their house, that there would be 0 to 10% fault put on that homeowner, and I certainly wouldn't ever take a case with 0 to 10% fault.
No, and again, I don't think that, people say, oh, well, if you shovel and then there's, it melts and you get this quote unquote black ice. I just don't see that as liability.
Right. So But let's talk about the whole comparative fault and how that factors in. Because I think, again, people are always wanting to know. So we say there's 0 to 10% at fault. What does that mean? Does it mean that you're basically multiplying that number as to what the total damages are?
No, I mean, so let's say somebody fell and broke their hip and they got $30,000 in medicals, and they, you go to a jury trial and they give $30,000 in medicals, and let's just make it easy numbers, $70,000 pain and suffering, and they get hit with, 70% fault. The plaintiff does.
That's right. So that would mean
they only get 30,000 then, or the opposite is it was 70-30, they get 70.
That's right. So the comparative fault system basically at the end of the day is a multiplicative formula that's used to reduce damages based on the fault of that individual plaintiff.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is we've all been on that, it seems to be less and less these days. It's kind of like smoking. You have I see less claims about seatbelts. But, generally if somebody was in a car wreck not wearing a seatbelt, it was pretty much you were getting hit with 15% comparative fault. That was kind of the industry norm, just right off the bat. You were dumb enough not to put on a seatbelt. If you got a $100,000 case, you're $15,000 to the bad for not putting on a seatbelt.
Comparative fault's a little different in Ohio. If the plaintiff is 51% at fault, they get zeroed out. They get nothing. Kentucky, they can be 99% at fault and theoretically still be hit with or still receive damages. Practically speaking, though, I've been doing this almost 25 years. You've been doing this a little over 25 years. Have you ever seen a case where somebody was like over 90% at fault and a jury came back and awarded them anything?
No. And you bring up a good point, the difference between Ohio and Kentucky. That's the problem right now with AI. Just like everybody's sitting at home talking black ice line. AI is generally not state specific, and tort law is pretty unique to each state. I mean, and that's what amazes me, because we get people call the office all the time, they're like telling us what the law is because AI told them something. Well, AI might be telling you what Illinois law is, not Kentucky.
So let's change the scenario a little bit. Let's talk about this property owner. Let's say that the city has passed an ordinance, which a lot have done here in northern Kentucky, where they impose a duty on the property owners to maintain the sidewalks. Does that change the liability analysis any?
No, and the case law holding is it creates a duty between that property owner and the city, but it doesn't allow that the person who gets hurt due to something wrong with the sidewalk to go directly against the homeowner. It still falls, they have to go after the city at that point.
Or whoever owns the sidewalk.
Right, now the city could arguably seek indemnity, especially if they had sent a letter saying, hey, you had a new patio poured and the concrete truck crushed the city's sidewalk, you have to fix it. I think the city could seek indemnification contribution from that homeowner at that point.
So let's just say, and I'm not really aware of any cities that would do this in northern Kentucky, maybe some of the smaller ones might, but if you have an ordinance in your city that imposes an obligation on the property owner to maintain and maybe even clear snow, and you failed to do that, could the city remedy it and then charge you as the property owner?
I mean,
charge from a financial perspective. I don't mean criminally.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could probably try.
As a code enforcement violation or something?
Yeah, and actually that was the kind of the question I had today, assuming it's one of those things where it was like, well, it's kind of a commercial area near a bus stop, but then you get into equal protection. So it's like, okay, I think we all would think, oh, it'd be good to plow these commercial areas, but we all live in streets. I mean, on my street, probably half the street are retirees, and I think all of them have snow blowers, thank God. But I mean, I spent like 2.5 hours shoveling, and I could hardly move later that day. So I mean, at the end of the day, I think that it's going to be tough for cities to pass on those kind of responsibilities, especially when you get this kind of snow that, let's be honest, a lot of homeowners just aren't able to move 12 plus inches of snow. Mm-hmm. So while they're all great. They're great for people that are bored, hold up for 2 days to get on social media and start applying what they read on AI. From a practical standpoint, I don't think most cities want to delve into
That's right.
imposing those kind of duties on anyone.
So let's shift the scenario a little bit. Let's say that you accidentally left a hose on in the fall because you're watering your lawn in, so you've got a hose on. You let it run in the fall. There's no expectation of snow. There's no expectation of ice, and it gets below freezing that night. Someone's walking their dog the next morning and hits a patch of ice on your sidewalk, basically because you allowed your sprinkler to run overnight and it froze over. Do you think there's liability in that situation?
Yep, I've had that case before in a city. I think it was a sump pump was actually slowly emitting water. It actually formed like wasn't so much the water. It was not a cold day. It was the water formed almost green kind of mold algae, and a jogger coming by, went down, if I recall, tore their knee up or something pretty bad.
So again, it goes kind of the basic concept that we've been discussing, that there has to be an affirmative action by that property owner taken, and that affirmative action is not removing the snow or removing the ice. The affirmative action is something like some other negligent act, a pipe breaking or faucet being run, septic tank overflowing. Maybe they just think it's cute to sprinkle down their sidewalk to watch people slip. Whatever it is, there has to be an affirmative action. What if you invite people to your house because you sell on the Poshmark market or Facebook Marketplace or whatever your item of choice is that you sell, and instead of shipping the items, people are coming to your house? Do you think that changes the liability analysis any?
I don't think again, I think you got to distinguish the sidewalk, because, Kentucky law is pretty clear. I mean, they actually say, since we actually have some cheat sheets here, generally owners or occupants of premises adjoining a public street are under no common law duty to keep their sidewalks in good repair. So I think that as it pertains to the sidewalk, no, I don't.
What about the walkway going to your house?
I think that gets a little bit different. Right. I think that if all of a sudden you know full well that you've got a landing, and somehow you've allowed that landing to go in disrepair.
Or if it was concealed, right? If the snow is concealing maybe a 1 or 2 foot drop.
Yeah, I think that it's a different ballgame once they're on your property.
Fair to say that all of these are very factually driven, and there's really no rule that fits everybody.
Yeah, and again, I think that's the problem with AI. It applies a general rule versus, again, I think there's a difference between liability potentially in the snow world when there's 2 inches on the ground versus 2 foot.
Explain why do you think there's a difference?
Not so much in the public sidewalk realm, but I think, let's say you and I own a restaurant. I think that if, snow's coming down and we decide to stay open, it's the standard is duty, breach, causation, and harm. And
so let's walk through that. So because we know what those mean, just like that. They're ingrained into every law student on day one, it seems. But just kind of walk people through very quickly what duty means, what breach means, what causation means, and what damages mean. Because that is the fundamental concept of all of this, is going back to the very root level of torts.
You have to establish a duty. What's your duty? So my duty is that, hey, I've told somebody to come over and pick up this item off a market. Or better yet, let's just say you and I own a hibachi restaurant, and we're open through the snowstorm. We're inviting people.
Christmas Day, probably.
Yeah, we want everybody to come and have hibachi. And so our duty is that we've invited people, we need to get them in and out. Breach is if you breach that duty. But the big issue is causation. And we all remember in law school that little, what was it, Paul's graph and little firecrackers. But really in Kentucky, it's ordinary or reasonable, prudent person. And that's where the facts come in.
Right.
I think that when there's 12 inches of snow on the ground, a reasonable person probably can't get that moved as quick as when there's 2 inches on it. So let's say that our restaurant, we've got 3 employees out there with shovels trying to clear it. We're arguably being reasonable, prudent, but the time that we only got 2 inches and we just say, to heck with it, we're not gonna do anything, we're probably not being. I think that's where the facts really come into play. And I think that people always want to apply like bright line rules, But really, that's what a jury does. You know, people tend to forget that it's literally you put 12 in the box, and they determine what a reasonable or ordinary, prudent person would do. It's not always black and white.
No, there's weird facts. So I had a case over in Ohio. I had a restaurant that I was defending, a chain restaurant, that was under construction. The parking lot was under construction, and there was a snowstorm. And the snow covered up some obvious gaps in the pavement and some obvious issues that the area was under construction. And a person was walking thinking it was all level, and they literally fell through about 18 to 24 inches where there was no marking of any construction zone or anything because the snow had covered it up, and they hurt themselves pretty bad. And you know, in Ohio, that is one that the plaintiff cannot be more than 51% at fault. And we did not win summary judgment on that issue, meaning that a judge determined that that would be a jury issue as to what the percentage of fault was. And like most cases, we ended up resolving it and settling it. But I think the interesting fact pattern there is that the snow concealed a defect on the property. And I think at the end of the day, the judge was like, hey, you know what? You're inviting people to your restaurant. You have obvious defect in your parking lot from the construction, and now the snow has covered it up, and you did nothing to try to clean it or fix it. You just let people continue to come in and try to buy your $9.99 fajitas.
Yeah, I think, again, it's all about the facts and circumstances at that time.
So let's just finally kind of shift the analysis to landlords, because there's a lot of landlords in Kentucky. There's a lot of litigation as it relates to landlords in Kentucky. And landlords have somewhat different obligations. So what are your thoughts on, you know, if I own a duplex, you know, what should be my normal maintenance schedule as it relates to snow and ice on the sidewalks of the duplex I own?
You know, I think the more that you can establish a policy, how you are handling things, the better. From, again, going back to that reasonable, I don't think that it's safe to assume that the minute that it stopped snowing, you know, Tuesday that, or whatever day it was, Monday, that within the hour, 12 inches of snow should be gone. So I think you're going to get kind of cut a little more slack, but if there's only a couple inches, I think being proactive, you're in better shape. I was shocked yesterday. I was at my nephew's birthday, and friends of ours, her and her significant other and their child living in I don't even say apartment, they're more like condos, but it's all rental units, and they have a 2-car garage, even though it's it's one of those 3-bedroom places, and they had to go find a snow shovel. And I was shocked that the landlord did not do the driveways. You know, I was thinking, wait a minute, if you live in a condo, the HOA would probably be clearing your driveways. So it sounds like that landlord's view was that I rent you and you're in charge of your exterior area to handle it.
And you probably could deal with that in a lease or some kind of contract. There's actually pretty clear law in Kentucky on it. Under statutory law for landlords, under KRS 383-595, if anyone wants to look it up and they're still bored and want to do a little Googling, that landlords have a statutory obligation to maintain rental properties in a fit and habitable condition, including keeping all common areas clean and safe. Now, obviously, that's very open-ended, what clean and safe means. It further is, the law would say, in some of the case law and some of the common law, that landlords who retain control over common areas are liable for physical harm caused by dangerous conditions in these areas if they could have discovered the condition and remedied it through reasonable care. And I think that gets to your analysis of 2 inches versus 12 inches with these landlords. I think it's probably reasonable that if you own rental property in the common sidewalks, the common areas, you know, common pathways to a door, you probably have an obligation to make reasonable efforts, which would be shovel them, salt that, do whatever. But if, you know, the snow's falling down faster than you can clean it, then, you know, maybe your reasonable efforts are just to go out there every hour, every 2 hours, every 3 hours, sprinkle some salt, whatever. But you got to make some effort. So is the bottom line here that the kind of idea that if I attempt to remove snow on my sidewalks or driveways, that should not be done because I'm making it less safe. Is that just a complete false urban legend?
Yes, in my opinion.
Why do you think people continue to think that?
I think that everybody just yells, "Hey Siri, do I need to shovel my driveway?" Or they type it into Google. I guess it's good for us. I think I've said this before. AI is getting worse by the day and giving legal answers. I don't know if it's maybe getting hit with so many different answers that it's made it a just all over the map, screwed up.
Right, and it's so absolute. Like we should almost, if you have your phone on you,
Yeah,
let's sample it. Let's see
I'm
what
afraid
AI.
what might come up.
Let's see what AI says.
Hey Siri, can I be sued for not shoveling my sidewalks?
Tell us. What's AI tell us?
It says, if you think it could be serious, ask me to call emergency services or someone you trust. So they think I've fallen and I can't get up.
Let's try again.
Hey Siri, if I don't shovel my sidewalk, can I be sued? Here we go. This is from Fine Law. It says, if you fail to shovel your sidewalk or other public walkway and someone slips and falls, you could potentially face a lawsuit.
Okay, that's fair.
But-
I'll buy that. You could potentially face a lawsuit.
But it goes against the specific whole,
because it's some nationwide
'Cause they're-
50-state thing.
right. Well, you can, I saw earlier, they have a synopsis of 50 states and the duty. Ironically, on Kentucky, it referenced the Lexington Ordinance. So it's like, well, what in the world does the Lexington Ordinance have to do with the state as a whole?
Bottom line is, whether you shovel or don't shovel is your deal, right? Do it if you want to do it. Don't do it if you don't want to do it. You own a business, you probably have a higher obligation. If you own an apartment complex, you probably have even a higher obligation. Like
Yeah.
most of this, if we do the right thing, you're probably going to be okay. And if
Yeah.
you apply some common sense to it.
Yeah, I think common sense is the biggest thing. I think generally, no, everybody always, God, how many times we heard about the McDonald's coffee, for heaven's sakes? Well, there was more to it than that. But I think, again, people sometimes, they don't apply just common sense. I mean, when jurors get in the box, they use common sense. They're not trained in the law, so they use common sense. And somebody who looks like they tried to do the right thing looks a lot better than somebody who looks like they were trying to pinch pennies and not, say, come to my restaurant, but I want you to, take your life into, put your life at risk trying to get in here or not. I just think that if you generally try to do the right thing, you'll be okay.
Cities have any liability? Or let's put it the other way. Let's say you're driving down the road. Final thought here. Driving down the road, whether it's a county road or a city road, because I don't want to get into the state immunity issues, county road or city road, and they haven't plowed yet, and you get into an auto accident. Can you bring in that municipality because they failed to plow the road?
I don't think so, unless you find something that they did wrong. Maybe they purposely didn't do that road. You're going to have some negligent act. I saw people all over. Right? I mean, it is amazing. I mean, they were railing on. I mean, it just why wasn't salt placed? Why wasn't this? Why wasn't that? I mean, I don't think. Again, it's all facts and circumstances. I don't think people sometimes understand that, because you and I represent cities. We know that they try to get out and pre-treat.
There's also a finite workforce.
Well,
that
and
they
the other
have
thing-
to give time off to.
Well, and that's another thing. I think somebody asked me the other day when I went out, ironically, my neighbor came up, fortunately with his tractor, because he's got down the street, him and his father have acreage, which is kind of unique. It's great for me. Across the street's, a farm, basically, even though I live in, suburbia. But he was like, hey, the city, nobody's touched the street yet. Well, what had happened was the city had touched the street the day before. And at that point, they went in and did what they could do, but then they all ran out of DOT hours. So they have to go home. Mm-hmm. So they're evaluating, do they go home to get to re-rest, but also they got to look at, okay, when's the snow going to stop? And I don't think sometimes the public firmly grasp that there's a lot of that that's going on behind the scenes that they just don't know about.
Well, and most of these people that work for cities and the counties, almost all of them are public works employees that are doing a lot of things throughout the year. It's not like there's just a fleet of people ready to plow the streets. So again, you have a finite amount of workforce, you have the DOT requirements of mandatory rest time, and just simply put, there's a lot of streets in almost every city, and people sometimes impose their own issues by not following the level 1 or level 2 emergencies, which are getting cars off the streets once it gets to a level 2 emergency, and making it harder.
Well, and I think that, you know, I do believe there's a lot of cooperation. I know I have a city that went and was doing part of a state, you know, because the state uses mainly contracts. You know, they contract it out. So, you know, another thing is, and I'm sure you've seen this in any city you represent, you know, what I have found is those public works employees, you know, they actually like the snow because they know they're going to, it's kind of like I have friends that are linemen. They know that they may not like having to go to Florida when the hurricane hits, but they know it's going to be, it becomes part of their yearly income. Unless it happens on like Christmas, it's rough. But I have found that they are more than willing, they're willing to work. The only thing that really stops them is DOT regs saying you can only drive so many hours. But every governmental worker I've ever known, they rise to the occasion. They want to get out there and plow.
And let's be brutally honest, and we can pick on our neighbors across the river because we don't represent them. I was over in Cincinnati earlier this morning, and I'm not sure any of those streets have seen a plow. Overall, in northern Kentucky, the amount of snow and ice that we received on Sunday through Monday, and the fact that really, realistically, almost virtually everybody could travel by noon on Tuesday is amazing. And I think it's a testament to all the hard work of the people that are out there.
Well, and you know what amazes me, and I forgot, it made me think of it the other day when I was trying to clear the path to get down to my trash cans. And, you know, I took a couple shovels and all of a sudden, boom, before I knew I was in the yard. But mentally, I was thinking I was on the walkway.
Right.
A dear friend of mine and yours, Mark Roden, I remember years ago when I was a young attorney, and he worked for Kenton County at the time, talking about when they get sent out at night and you've had that level of snow, literally just knowing where in the world the roadway is. So you think about it, when you're shoveling a walkway, you end up in your yard because you think you know where it's at.
Right.
Imagine if you're in a gigantic dump truck.
Right, and you've been doing this for 8-9 hours and it's still snowing.
And you can't see anything. It's just all white.
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of
so
scary.
people need to relax, they need to chill, right? And if they want to complain, we got more snow coming Friday and Saturday. Go apply at your local city and volunteer to plow the streets, right?
Well, and again, they're all over the map on that. My wife's like, I heard only 1 to 1 inch, and then she's like, wait a minute. She started blasting some newscaster, or he or she was wrong. And it's like, they don't have a clue what's coming.
Well, thanks again for paying attention. I tell you what, please, we're always looking for topics. We're always looking for things to talk about. Instant message us, comment on our Facebook page, comment on this post. Next week, we hope to have another special guest with us to kind of mix it up as we go into the new year.
Thanks.